Welcome to this GEODE conversation titled Data Sharing as Catalyst for Expanding Geothermal Energy Deployment. This series is brought by the GEODE Consortium, which is led by Project in the Space and Society of Petroleum Engineers and funded by the U.S. Department of Energy's Geothermal Technologies Office. My name is Eugenia Torregrosa. I am the U.S. Subsurface Lead of Project in the Space, and I will be your moderator today. Today's shows will last 30 minutes, and we encourage you to ask questions in the chat during the program. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest, Nicole Taberna. Nicole Taberna is a geothermal data scientist at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and the chair of the GEODE Subsurface Data and Characterization Working Group. Her experience centers around bridging the gaps between geoscience and data science, including many things like machine learning, interactive data visualization, data pipeline development, subsurface characterization, statistical methods and analysis, and managing public-facing data products. Nicole, welcome to this GEODE conversation episode.
Hi, Evie, and everyone tuning in today. Thanks so much for being here. Data sharing is a really important topic, especially when it comes to smaller but growing industries like geothermal, and I'm really excited to chat with you all about it today.
You are very welcome, Nicole, and we are going to start to talk about different topics. And my first question to you is, can you briefly explain why geothermal developers are so interested in oil and gas data?
Yeah, so generally speaking, geothermal is a much smaller industry than oil and gas, and therefore its projects often work with smaller budgets. And because of this, many geothermal development companies are limited in the data that they can collect. And this means generally in early stages of their exploration campaigns, they're more reliant on existing public data rather than being able to go out and collect their own exploration data. And because of this, they face higher upfront risks during exploration because often these public data sets aren't of perfect quality, meaning that the outputs that result from these data sets are also not of perfect quality. Oil and gas companies, on the other hand, already have generated huge quantities of subsurface data over their more than a century of exploration and production of the subsurface resources. And much of this data is directly applicable to geothermal development, especially for systems like sedimentary geothermal systems, which are often co-located with oil and gas fields. And so all that is to say that access to these data sets, even just for spent oil and gas fields or on a generalized scale, could help the geothermal community lower exploration costs, reduce geologic uncertainty, and make more informed drilling decisions, especially in early stages of these projects.
I see clearly what are the advantages of this type of information and how sometimes the early geothermal companies like struggle a little bit to access this data, and I see all the advantages you just mentioned. Okay, as a second question, we would like to know it's what are the biggest benefits of cross-sector data sharing, particularly for the emerging geothermal technologies?
Yeah, so overall, data sharing reduces duplication of efforts and it allows smaller and sometimes emerging players, like many of the newer geothermal developers we're seeing, to make use of existing knowledge instead of starting from scratch. And this accelerates their project timelines immensely. On a broader scale, sharing data enables the kind of collaboration that drives innovation and helps integrate geothermal into the larger energy mix. Importantly, it's not just geothermal that benefits. Oil and gas companies stand to gain new business opportunities and better or new reputational value as leaders in new energy ventures that expand the current energy landscape. And we've seen already demonstrated success in cross-sector data sharing efforts in the past through efforts like the hydraulic fracturing test sites, where DOE, academia, and industry partnered with the common goal of advancing next generation hydrocarbon extraction technologies during the shale revolution. And in more recent years, some of the newer geothermal startups that we've seen have already started to benefit from partnerships that facilitate sharing of oil and gas data. It's really giving them a leg up. So, yeah.
Okay, we have also another question for you. It's about what are this some low risk, high reward ways that oil and gas companies can begin engaging with geothermal stakeholders on data sharing? What are the opportunities?
One of the easiest starting points to share data would be to share it at the basin or field level, then on a per well basis. So that's to say, even generalized or anonymized data sets can offer immense value to geothermal projects without compromising proprietary interests. Additionally, data can be shared only for spent fields if proprietary interests are a concern for producing fields. Another approach would be to participate in consortiums and partnerships that are specifically structured to balance confidentiality with collaboration. So still allowing that collaboration to occur, but implementing specific measures to prevent um, the the sharing of confidential information. And then lastly, data owners can explore limited time or non-commercial licensing agreements that would allow developers to use data for specific outlined purposes. And overall, these kinds of efforts build trusted partnerships and they unlock value from data without exposing sensitive business information.
I see one of the comments you make about research consortium. This is something that oil and gas have done in the past many times. When companies in oil and gas they need to deep dive in one specific scientific topic. Many times, universities or research centers are being part of this kind of collaborations, and this is something that is not new, and we can apply also for geothermal purposes. Okay, another question, it's about data vendors, because we are talking about sharing data freely, but data vendors have traditionally built their business models around exclusivity and curated data products. Then how is going to fit this in their business, and how do you see these business models evolving to allow data sharing with geothermal stakeholders while they still maintain their profitability and competitive advantage?
Yeah, so this is an important question that comes up a lot. Um, and it's a tough one, but there are a few options here for potential mutually beneficial paths forward. Um, so one being data vendors could offer sort of a tiered model where they could provide raw or anonymized data under an open or discounted access license while continuing to sell a curated or premium version of the data set with more advanced analytics or QA and QC or just a higher quality data product. And then in this scenario, that competitive edge would lay in that high quality curated data set rather than just the raw data. Um, Another option is that data vendors could collaborate with geothermal stakeholders in these early stages to co-design new products that are tailored to geothermal use cases. And by doing so, they can help grow a geothermal data market that they can directly participate in. And then that would position them as early leaders in a sector that's really well positioned for expansion, especially given the current energy climate.
No, I see totally what you say, because they have also a business opportunity in geothermal,
Exactly.
and of course there will be different levels of products, and they can go into more premium ones, and these ones that are the basics that are needed for any evaluation, it can be freely shared. And because actually many state databases they have this information, but the problem is that is not appropriately organized or curated, and that makes difficult for the stakeholders to access this information. And I see the value on that, and the value of the future market for these companies building a more advanced products. Okay, another questions that it's more general, and it is more into how do you see, for you, what would be the ideal future for geothermal and oil and gas data collaborations? What steps do you think that they have to they do you need they need to do to get there?
So in my ideal future, geothermal and oil and gas companies would operate within a shared data ecosystem. And this would be one that includes standardized formats, secure platforms for sharing sensitive data, and structured access models for data sharing. So specific models for different tiers of types of data sharing. In this scenario, oil and gas companies would be active partners in geothermal development, and they would use their infrastructure and data to diversify their assets and extend the value of their existing wells and other infrastructure. To get there, though, we'd need a combination of technical, cultural, and policy shifts, and we'd also need standardized data practices, like including incentives for data sharing and more collaborative forums like GEODE, where stakeholders from both sectors can co-develop strategies towards data sharing.
Okay. Then if you have the opportunity to say just one thing to oil and gas leaders right now about geothermal growth, what would it be, for example?
Yeah, I guess it would be that understanding the geothermal potential in your assets can provide great value to your company, whether it's repurposing wells in depleted reservoirs or offering parasitic power or offsetting parasitic power needs with on-site geothermal or generating new revenue by selling power to the grid, whichever model it takes. Basically, you already have the data, you already have the infrastructure and the expertise in the subsurface. So really, geothermal isn't a leap for oil and gas companies. It's just a logical extension of what you're already doing and doing well. And so that is managing subsurface uncertainty and delivering energy from complex reservoirs. And one more point on that question is that while the goal of GEODE is to foster exchange of data and ideas from oil and gas to advance geothermal, I really want to emphasize that this exchange can go both ways and it can be mutually beneficial. So engaging in emerging energy areas like geothermal allows oil and gas companies to diversify their portfolios and identify new revenue streams using the skill sets and the infrastructure that they already have.
Great. Then another question is like some of the biggest barriers to oil and gas data sharing are proprietary concerns. That's something that traditionally oil and gas companies, they think is their value, their knowledge, their data. They tend to keep that secret. And what do you think that are practical solutions? What are the practical solutions you see to gaining traction on this, like this, to remove this proprietary concern? And if there are ways for data to be useful without revealing business sensitive information, like at basin or field level, like because uh, this is something that the companies always keep like secret, and they don't share, or they, when they do a joint venture is when they share among their companies. But how do you see, what are the solutions for making these barriers less to make the companies to be less concerned about this?
Yeah, so we've talked about this a little bit, hinted at it, I guess, but just to go into a little more depth, one practical solution would be controlled point-to-point data sharing, where access is granted under specific terms rather than through a general public release. Another option would be to aggregate or anonymize data, sharing insights at a field or basin scale, which provides meaningful information without exposing competitive details. Or again, sharing data for spent fields that have lost their competitive value, but might still have value in the geothermal space. And it's also important to highlight that you don't have to share everything about the reservoir. So I think this ties into a question in the chat, but geothermal companies are often interested in parameters that are not essential for hydrocarbon extraction. For example, just bottom hole temperatures can provide immense value on their own. Data sets like resistivity are often of greater value than seismic data, which I know is coveted by the oil and gas industry. But at the same time, really all data is useful for geothermal developers. So while that's true, sharing some info is better than not sharing any. And so it's sort of a situation of we'll take what we can get, whatever oil and gas operators are willing to share, we'd accept, and we can repurpose it to be of use for geothermal. But overall, I think just seeing these data sharing opportunities as mutually beneficial partnerships rather than as a threat to business models would go a long way.
Okay, and how can recognition, funding, eligibility, or collaboration opportunities serve as a non-financial incentive for data sharing?
Yeah, these incentives can be almost as powerful as financial incentives. So, recognition, whether through awards, publications, or case studies, can demonstrate leadership in the energy industry and boost your brand reputation. On top of that, funding eligibility is a strong motivator. If access to public funds or, for example, DOE programs are tied to data sharing commitments, companies would be more likely to participate in sharing their data. And I think with a lot of the DOE programs, you are often required to share data. So that is something that already exists with initiatives like the Geothermal Data Repository. But lastly, collaboration opportunities like joint industry projects or consortia can provide early access to new insights, technologies, and partners, all while helping shape the future of geothermal development.
Good. We have some questions from the audience right now, and one of the questions from we have it's like, in which areas oil and gas and geothermal companies can really share data, considering that the type of systems, materials, fluid properties, operating conditions differ significantly.
Yeah, so it really depends, I think, on the type of oil and gas resource or the type of geothermal development company, the type of technology they're interested in deploying. But for conventional hydrothermal, we're always talking about temperature, permeability, and fluid as the required features. But for next generation geothermal systems, there's no longer a requirement for permeability. A lot of times you're creating it, similarly to what is being done in hydraulic fracturing for hydrocarbon extraction. Um, and then on top of that, there's closed loop systems, which don't even require fracturing of the ground. And really, you just need the temperature and heat transfer properties there. So all that's to say, all data are of interest, except for maybe those related to the hydrocarbon source. But specific examples would be bottom hole temperatures, any flow test data that you have, or drilling data, information about how easy or challenging it is to drill through certain types of rocks in specific basins. If
Yeah.
possible, production data from oil and gas fields is helpful as well. Really just depends, I would say.
I think you mentioned that before, specifically on sedimentary basins, is when oil and gas is going to provide the more useful data sets, I would say. But as you say, in other unconventional geothermal assets, in, for example, the EGS assets, it's for example, one type of data is more relevant than others. And for example, geomechanics it's very relevant. All the information that would be acquired from that, it's related to fracturing and geomechanics, is something that is really useful to define how you drill those wells in a very harsh conditions. And as you know, there are many wells that don't reach basement, and the information you get in sedimentary basins are just related to sedimentary deposits. And this is where I think is the information that is more useful. But there are many types of geothermal emerging right now, which would benefit from different data sets that are very complete most of the time, and they can be useful. Even if all the data sets won't be useful, but some of them they will be. And also, what I see also, that we put a lot of emphasis in geothermal, or making sure that we know the thermal profile of the rocks. This is something that is always measured in oil and gas as well, but it's not as detailed. And but it is some information that also lacks sometimes, like, because it's something. For example, you mentioned before bottom hole temperatures, and those temperatures sometimes are not corrected, and because we take it them from the oil and gas records. And I see that this is, for example, information that is valuable, and that if it's properly curated, it could be useful for any type of geothermal.
Agreed.
Okay, then I think we are now for the time of Q&A. And if anyone wants to make any questions, we can make some questions. If not, we can continue with the conversation a little bit more. Any questions from the audience? Okay. Let me see if I can mention something else as a closing thoughts on this. I think while the goal of GEODE is foster exchange of data and ideas from oil and gas to advance geothermal, we emphasize that this exchange can go both ways and can be mutually beneficial. And we would like to engage in also to emerging energy areas like geothermal will allow oil and gas company to diversify to their portfolios, as Nicole mentioned. And I think it's a great opportunity for also for data companies to have a new landscape and new business opportunities. Do you want to mention anything, Nicole, on that as a wrap up of all we commented today?
I think you described it well. I guess the only last thing I'd add is that myself and other geothermal stakeholders are really excited to collaborate with oil and gas partners. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have interest in learning more about geothermal or working together. So yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, as we have no questions right now, we are gonna wrap up the session. And I want to thank Nicole and the audience for attending to this session, and also for the questions we have. We only have one, but we are very happy we have one. And everyone for joining us today. I want to mention also that we are going to share with you at the end of the session a QR code on the screen in which you can provide your feedback. And thank you again, and to the audience and Nicole for continued collaboration toward a more sustainable future. Thanks a lot to everyone.
Thanks, Iggy. Thanks, everyone.